Doug and Rachel, welcome back to Unbroken. It's a pleasure to have you, and I'm excited to do another topic in the new series we're doing, Inner Journey. And today we're going to talk about relationships and how trauma has affected our relationships and how we are in relationships. So welcome, you guys.
Hey, nice to see you, Mac. Rachel.
Good to see you too, Doug.
So let's see. I'll start. So I was thinking about the topic, and I was thinking about how myself and both of you also, and so many children, how we grow up in an environment that's not safe, right, in any way. And yet the almost like the first task for a child is to establish a sense of safety, right? A sense of trust. And so how does that happen in an environment where that isn't there, right? And then that bonding that's supposed to happen with the mother or the caregiver and the baby, we know with MK Ultra and all that, that bond is deliberately attacked. So then there's this issue with attachment, right? It doesn't develop normally. And then what I know from psychology is that babies understand who they are by reading the face of the parent, right? So if you look at a baby and you smile, then they feel, oh, I'm real and I'm good, right? So I know I didn't get that. My mother's face was angry or hostile. And so I was just thinking of all of these things. So what do you guys think about that?
Rachel?
Interesting.
Ladies first.
That trauma bonding thing, or that trauma breaking with the mother, is definitely a big issue. I was just thinking about the particular experiment, I can't remember the name of it, where they actually put a mother in front of a child, and they actually made the mother just sit there completely deadpan in front of the baby, and there was footage of it. It was so horrible. It was just so horrible. I had memories of that myself. And the child can't read the mother's face because the mother's just deadpan, and the child's trying to engage. Oh, just cruel. It's just so cruel. And that's I guess your vanilla end of abuse, but it's still horrible to watch. Yeah, it is very difficult to have relationships when you've had any kind of trauma, and it doesn't have to be the sort of serious or severe trauma that we've had. Any kind of trauma can make it difficult to relate to people, because we are social animals, and we look to others for confirmation that we're doing the right thing, and we're saying the right things, and we're socially acceptable, and we're not embarrassing ourselves. I know in some certain when I got out of my father's grip and was socializing, I was part of the Adelaide band scene at that point, and we would go out to gigs, and my partner would be on stage, and I'd be left in the social scene, and I'd just be this absolutely terrified little mouse, thinking, unless I was very drunk, and then I'd be headbanging, but most of the time I was just sitting there completely like a mouse, terrified, because I didn't know how to relate to people. I didn't know what to say. If people came up and spoke to me, or even worse, because I was projecting this, I'm scared, I'm like a rabbit in the spotlight, I'd just be on my own, feeling more and more and more uncomfortable and alone and terrified. It's an amazing thing trying to find your way, especially because I also had my personality stripped from me. By the time I left home, I didn't know who I was. So I was relating entirely to the world through the eyes of my partner at that time, which is also pretty weird, but it's actually pretty common. I've met quite a few people who've said the same thing after having a very traumatic childhood. So yeah, relationships are probably the hardest thing when you've been through immense trauma.
Yeah. Doug, what
Yeah,
about you?
Yeah, I find the same. Well, I still have no bond with my mother. She intentionally would sever that. And even from a baby, I mean, I think I was bottle fed. I never ever connected to her, and she was always very, very cruel. And at times when she was nice, it was all fake to get information, again, to be cruel to me. So for me, growing up was similar to Rachel. I mean, I really struggled socially. I mean, I was good one-on-one, so I was able to make one-on-one friends, And when I'd often, because home was never safe, I would often go to friends' places, and their parents and their siblings would treat me lovely. And I didn't get that at home. So I got some sort of modeling, positive modeling, and both in primary and also high school, I had teachers who could see the state I would turn up at school in and take me under their wings, and sometimes I'd go and stay at their places as well. But my first serious girlfriend, beautiful, beautiful woman. But the moment it went beyond friendship, I freaked out and I ran screaming in the other direction because of all the abuse I'd been through and that I'd buried, and that the mind control had blocked out. And so, I'd met a number of really amazing, beautiful people who could be really good partners, but I wasn't used to having good partners because my whole childhood was trauma.
Yeah. No, and when I was in school, I was so shy. I was scared to death of everyone, just people scared me. And my mother was very unpredictable. 1 minute she could be, warm and funny, and then the next minute she could be choking me or beating me with a stick or whatever. So I had this, always have had, and still to some degree, I can still feel it in me today, this anxiety. Like, is the person going to be, are they going to turn on me? Is something, so it's this feeling that I can't quite 100% relax, within any relationship. And I remember going to school and I just didn't talk to anyone. I would always have my nose in a book. I was a straight A student, so school was my escape. I loved studying and reading and everything school related. And, when I was at school, I was free for a little bit, but I would not talk to the other kids. I was totally clammed up and scared and quiet and shy. And so I'm sure the other kids thought I was really weird, but I myself felt like I was different. And so I didn't feel it in my even child's mind. I had this idea that the other kids are normal and I'm not, right? So I craved that, what I saw that they had with each other, but I didn't have at that moment in time when I was little, the courage to try and reach out and connect.
Yeah. And I think that's normal. I went through a period where for 9 months I didn't talk. And like you, school was my escape, did very well at it. My teachers would, really support me in that. But, I would go through some stages where I'd be able to communicate and other ones where I'd just be in the freeze all the time. And for that period, I was known as a kid who didn't talk. And then I'd move out of that into another stage. But it was, but for me, school was anywhere away from home was good for me. But, as a family, we never had visitors at home. I think once in my childhood, I remember having, auntie or uncle dropped in or a cousin, and that was it. We didn't socialize. People didn't come to the house. And, the house was just house of terror.
Yeah. Ugh.
You do hear that a lot with the speech difficulties with children that have been abused. It's something that people need to look out for because it's really common. There's been multiple people in my family who've had speech problems, whether it's not speaking at all or delayed speech, not speaking till 5 or 6, or stutters, speech impediments, those sorts of things. It is really common. I was lucky. I had good friends. I didn't have best friends all the way through high school and primary school. Well, high school I did, but primary school I didn't. That was my escape, like you, Doug. That was where I felt like, I was still awkward, but at least that was a whole different world away from the family.
Yeah, but other families were lovely. And it was interesting because I would go to other families and I didn't know how to operate within them because they were loving and caring and supportive and embracing. And with my girlfriend, I go there and would cook and talk and laugh. And yeah, it took a while to get used to it because that wasn't what I experienced at home. At home, I was totally excluded by both of my parents. And then when they got divorced, still by my mother. And then, my siblings were trained to do the same. So, it was lovely, but it was quite an adjustment to learn how to accept care and to be, appreciated.
Yeah, I remember being surprised as a young person when somebody seemed to like me or think I was interesting or good, because it had been so drilled into me that I was the devil, that I was terrible, that I was bad, that I assumed no one would want to get to know me. And I actually remember a pivotal time. I went to this all-girls Catholic high school in Rome, Italy, so you can't get more Catholic than that. And I remember I think it was my junior year, they had this thing that they would do with, it would be like a religious retreat with some of the priests from a different school. And it was a good one, though. It wasn't like a negative experience. And so the kids went and they would select people to go to this retreat. And then you had to give like a talk on a topic that they would give you. And to my surprise, I was approached and selected. And the topic I was given was, I still remember the title. It was called "In Reality, Who Am I?" Right? So because I was quiet, I was shy. So I wrote this apparently very moving piece. And, I didn't describe, the real stuff that was going on, but it was in the vein of like, the pain that I was carrying and whatnot. And so then it came time for me to read it to the small group at the retreat. And to my surprise, everyone was crying. And I thought, oh, like it was so shocking to me that it validated me in a huge way. And after that, those girls that had been on the retreat started to seek me out at school and talk to me and form connections. And I was thrilled because it had not ever occurred to me until that age, 16 or so, that maybe I could have friends, maybe people would like me. I believed everything I'd been told. And so I began to have friends at that last year of high school. For me, felt like an incredible awakening because I actually had friends and did things and laughed. And, so it was a tipping point for me. And then that's when I became much more outgoing. It's like a different persona took over. And then I do have very good social skills. And that's when they sort of began to come out, but not until that age.
And was that an adjustment, Max? Did it take time for you to get used to being popular?
Yeah, and I don't think I ever 100% can feel popular, even though I know that I have been. And later in my college years and in my career working years, I was always very well liked and popular, but it never. See, that's, I think, one of the things that trauma does. It's like I would see it, I would experience it, and I couldn't quite hold it and believe it, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting that topic of popularity, because I never ever had that. I never felt that I was popular in any way, shape or form. And I'm just thinking now, probably the only time that I've had that in my life is probably now. But it's not so much a popularity, it's accepted by a group of people that I respect and trust, and I feel really honoured to know, like yourselves. So to me, that would be a form of popularity. Certainly not something I experienced at any other time in my life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, go ahead, Doug.
Yeah, I was going to say, for me, because school was, such the escape, I managed to be popular at school, and people liked me. I mean, people would come up to me who I didn't know and say, "I've got to play football. Can you look after my watch? You're the most honest kid in school." And I'd think, why do they think that sort of thing? So, and I did very well at art and would win a lot of competitions, and but my mother at the same time, she'd go to parent-teacher nights. My teachers would rave about me, and I'd get in trouble for it. She'd come home and absolutely go after me for it, and then she'd try and convince me that I was insane, to the point where she eventually hauled me off to a psychologist to prove that I was insane. And I'd got the point where I was doubting myself, and a psychologist, to his credit, turned around after he had time with both of us and said, "Well, Mrs. McIntyre, I've spoken to both of you, and I think you're the problem." And that was a huge boost for me, that someone would back me up like that. I mean, it absolutely infuriated her. I still can't bring up that topic with her, but you know, for me it was like, yes, you know, I'm not crazy, even though my mother's trying to convince me constantly that I am. So it's all these challenges, and then how we take that into our relationships with other people. I mean, I was petrified of other people. I mean, I was petrified of sex. You know, anyone, you know, that was attracted to me, and I was quite good looking as a young man, I would run screaming in the other direction. Oh, thank you, thank you. But the thing is, I couldn't have a normal sexual adolescence like anyone else because of all the repressed memories of being, you know, raped and abused and trafficked and, you know, rituals and everything like that. And it's only now that I'm, you know, actually starting to feel a little bit normal. But, you know, anyone that showed any interest in me, I would be horrified, not just horrified, I'd be terrified and have anxiety attacks and things like that. And the other thing I couldn't do was group smacks or Rachel, because again, it was that whole ritual thing. The moment I was the focus of attention of a group, I would just have full on anxiety and I couldn't talk. You know, normally, you know, one-on-one, I was quite coherent, but in a group, it was, yeah, I felt very, very, very threatened.
Yeah, you know, that's a really interesting topic, groups, because I think all of us were basically the scapegoat, the sacrifice in any group, right?
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
so then when you're later in life, when you're among a group of friends or any kind of, or a group of coworkers or any group of people, I think subconsciously, if I look back in my 20s and 30s, I would create a subconsciously expect and somehow end up in a position where the group ganged up on me. And but because when we have a pattern of relationship in us, we somehow subconsciously put ourselves in that same pattern, right? So we replicate it. And another thing that illustrates that is, you know, because I was not considered worthy, I was used, you know, all the time. It was just, I was always the one giving. I never got anything. I never got love. I never got safety. I never got care. And so when I would form friendships, I would subconsciously, because of that, pick people that wouldn't give me true attention or love, like that wouldn't really, they were more needy and selfish. And so it felt familiar and comfortable to have a friend that I would take care of. I would be motherly or therapist-y or whatever, and be there for them. And it was one-sided from me over to them. And then I would feel resentful at some point after a certain period of time. I would sort of say, well, wait a minute, you know, where's my side in this relationship? But it took me a long time to realize, oh, but I set it up that way. I literally would go for people that would be narcissistic or selfish or whatever, because that's what my mother was. Was familiar. And so I would recreate that same pattern in friendships.
Yes, the whole group dynamics, that's something I've struggled with, and I still struggle with. I still really don't know how to deal with it. And the trouble with when you start to remember your childhood, if you've had a really traumatic childhood, trying to explain to other people simple things like, no, I don't want to go to your party, I'm sorry, I just can't sit with a whole bunch of people I don't know, and not have facial tics and, you know, sweat profusely and want to burst into tears. And people don't understand that. It's like, well, why wouldn't you come to my birthday party? Well, I just couldn't deal with it. You know, it's so hard. It is so hard trying to explain those things. I forced myself to do my own therapy, which was I was doing as a reader, as a psychic reader, I would do markets with groups of people. But that was always safe because I had my own stall and people could come to me and come and talk to me, but I didn't have to get up from my stall. In fact, it was awkward to do so because things could get stolen, and so I'd have to sit there. But that was a really good test and training for me to get to know and trust a bunch of people, because we would regularly all have our stalls together and meet new people as well, because clients would be coming in. And yeah, so that was, but I still struggle with it. I mean, I did a brief speech on the steps of Parliament last year, and that was it last year or 2020? Can't remember. But it was so intense to do that, just to be up on and be at the focus of attention for just a short period of time. It's only a few minutes. But that was, yeah, that was another, I forced myself to do it. Had to.
Yeah. Prolonged exposure therapy, right? You make yourself, when I was young in my career, I would, at one point I ran a batterers program for men. So I did men's groups, and I had to relate to the police department and the probation department, because the men would be arrested and then given an opportunity to do 6 months of a men's group rather than jail. So I had to give talks and tell them what I was doing in the program. And oh my God, I remember when I first started doing that, I mean, I would start sweating. Like, luckily I wouldn't lift my arms because my armpits were so wet after the first 5 minutes. And I was literally shaking, but covering it up. And I felt like I was just gonna pee all over myself. It was so terrifying to a degree that's not normal. And I was aware of it, but somehow I had this ability to just push through. And so over time, it got easier and easier, but absolutely. And by the way, I hate being out like at a concert or somewhere like Las Vegas or Disneyland or anywhere. I remember once I was in New York City for New Year's when the ball drops, although that amount of people, I just shut down completely. Like, I cannot handle that. So now I don't put myself in those situations.
Yeah, well, I find it really difficult to communicate with people, even like Rachel said, going to the party, because at home, as children, we were told you don't speak unless you're spoken to. So if I tried to say anything without being spoken to, I'd be hit across the head and fly across the room. That's how hard I'd get hit. And then, so typically for me, any type of verbal interaction either meant pain or death, because, with the rituals and things like that. So if I'm at school, or anywhere outside the home, I really struggled saying to people what I felt or what I wanted, because I was so petrified of the consequence. And even though saying to someone, look, I don't want to come to your party, I would be subconsciously thinking if I said that, then they'll kill me, which is a really irrational thing, but that was the subtext that was going on inside, because that's what I was used to in the home environment. So it was really difficult to be up front and to talk to friends at school and to just say calmly, oh, yeah, no, I don't feel like that. And so, like you're saying before, Max, I would put myself with people where I would do everything they wanted without doing what I needed to do for me. And I didn't value who I was either, because likewise at home, I'd been treated like I was worthless. Being trafficked as a child, you're treated like an object. You're there to pleasure these other adults. It doesn't matter what you want. And if I didn't do the right thing, the punishment was brutal. At home, when I stood up for myself, I almost got killed a number of times. It was all sorts of brutal things. So I carried that into how I related to people outside the home. I left home at 18, but it took me a few years to sort of find my way and learn how to relate to other people. And as you say, through exposure, it's through, I grew up in a very poor area in the western suburbs of Sydney. I went to university, all of a sudden all my friends were people from very rich areas. I still lived in a crumbling down apartment and things like that. But, the exposure to different people who treat you nicely, it takes time, but you eventually learn new skills and then better skills.
Yeah. And, the thing that you were saying about the sexual abuse and how you were terrified of sex, I think it can go the opposite direction too, which was the way I was. I was used as a sex toy. I mean, I was trafficked and raped. And so I believed, I remember when I left at 18 and I went to college, I thought it was just normal to have sex with any guy who wanted it, So I would now it's called hooking up, that was back, I started college in 1982, so it was a while back, but I had this idea that, if someone liked me and like I met a guy or whatever, then of course I would just sleep with him, And when I look back, I'm not sure how much I got out of it, because it was almost like, and that training that they gave me, I knew what to do, and I knew how to be like a femme fatale kind of thing, you know, sort of sexy. And so I had all these skills, and I was very popular and sought after. You know, I always had guys wanting to be my boyfriend or marry me. But when I look back now, there wasn't like much of me in that relationship emotionally. It was just a body and sex, and I could do that well, and I knew what that was. But yeah, so that's what I did. I became promiscuous because, well, I thought that's what you did.
Yeah. Yeah, I would shake so uncontrollably. There's no way I could do anything. But when I got married, I did similar to that. You know, I became the expert in the bedroom and got very little in return. And, you know, that was a role I was comfortable with till I got to a point in my healing where that didn't work anymore.
Yeah, same here. The training was that you would pick up what that partner wanted, and be everything they could possibly imagine a sexual partner could be, and intuitively would just pick up on cues, I suppose. One of the issues that I had, I didn't end up promiscuous because I had a family member who was, and I saw the way that they were treated, and I didn't want to be that person. So poor darling, she was an example. I had the problem of men would show an attraction to me, and because I've been trained that I couldn't say no, no matter how creepy and revolting and disgusting and how absolutely appalled I was that this person was paying attention to me, I would play up to it. And then I'd get myself into these dreadful situations because I actually didn't want anything to do with that person, but I wasn't allowed to say no. So, and that was very awkward because, you know, I had partners who assumed I was promiscuous when I wasn't, because I wasn't actually fulfilling any of that. I would eventually get to the point where I would go to the partner and say, this person's bothering me. It's just ridiculous, really, now that I look back on it. But yeah, that's the training. You can't say no. I wasn't allowed to say no.
Yeah, I've always during my life found it hard to say no to things. And, you know, with sex, because of the trauma, I would walk away because I couldn't say no. So I would just shut down and walk away because, you know, because to say no meant, you know, death meant, you know, all sorts of things like that. So you get all these interplays of different things. But then I would still do that you know, I'd be frantic, you know, busy with everything. And people who are busy would come and say, oh, can you do this? And I go, yeah, that's fine.
I mean, you couldn't say no verbally, but you said no, your body said no, you know, you just shut down.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
And then the other thing, and, you know, maybe a lot of people can relate to this, because I think we kind of have, you know, let's just say we don't have a pandemic of a virus, but we have a pandemic of a lack of love and attention to children, right? Even in so-called, you know, benign families. And so one thing I noticed is, so I was always trying to get my mother to love me, you know, and I didn't feel like I could ever succeed. I mean, for one thing, she was tortured herself and put through so much stuff, so she couldn't really be present. And she didn't outwardly express love towards me. She was very self-focused on herself. And so I became her mother. And that's the way that I could get her to love me, is by being there for her and taking care of her and being whatever she wanted to me. And so I was left with a desperation, like a hole in me, that everyone wants that love. And I think babies instinctively know they're supposed to be loved. And then when you're not, like there's a wound that's there. And so as I got older, I would have two opposite sides of me. One side would be almost like a little baby or a little kid who was so naive and open and just wanted to be loved. Like, oh, love me, love me. And so I would go towards relationships in a almost desperate way. And then on the other hand, if I was close to someone and that happened, then I would be terrified and couldn't do it. And then I would push them away, you know? And I actually remember my turning point, I met this Italian guy when I was in college. I would go to Rome, to Italy, where my mom lived, every summer. And I met this Italian guy on a trip to Greece, and we hit it off. And, you know, we had a fling, and when it was time to go back to the States, you know, he said, oh, you know, I love you. And I thought, oh, that's nice. I said, well, but, you know, I'm going back to the States and I'm going to college. And I had this sort of coldness, you know, in me. And he said, well, I'm going to come to the US. And I said, oh, okay, sure. So I went back, and sure enough, he came. He showed up a few months later. So I was living in a house with roommates. And so he came, and so he moved in, and we lived in the same bedroom. And suddenly the reality of, one day it hit me like, oh, I'm in a relationship and I'm living with a person, and I was panicked. And so I was just acting that push-pull out. And I remember very vividly, I think I was 20, in my early 20s. And one day he sat me down and he said to me, look, he said, I love you, and I know you love me, but you're pushing me away, then you want me close, then you push me away. He's like, you need to make a decision. He said, if you want this relationship, say yes, but then you're in and you don't push me away anymore. And if you don't, say no, and I'll go back to Italy. So he said, you've got to choose. And I remember the shock in that moment, going, what? Like, oh. And so I have courage. I've always had courage. So I decided to dare to say yes. So I said yes. And that was the first time, that's when I stopped sleeping with so many people. It, like, something happened. And after that, I would only have, you know, more serious, more long-term relationships. But that moment was so vivid. So he called me out on that push, pull. And so I grew in that moment, you know, because I was forced to. I had to make that choice.
He obviously had a mature attitude to the whole situation, because a lot of people get really angry or upset or whatever. Wow.
Yeah. So have you guys experienced that? I want to be close. No, I can't be. Yes, I want it. No, I can't.
Oh, totally. What about you, Rachel?
Yeah, probably still doing it.
Well, I remember an instance when I was married and I'd started recovering more memories, and I was in the lounge room and I was crying because, you know, I'm starting to remember these horrific memories. And, you know, my ex-wife's down the other end of the hall, and as she walked down the hall, with every footstep, I noticed my emotions drained out of my body, till when she came in the room, I was numb. And I wasn't safe feeling my pain around other people. So I was safe caring for other people. I was safe looking after their needs. I was safe cooking, cleaning, working, whatever. But I wasn't safe being in my body when other people were around. And that,
you couldn't be vulnerable, right? You couldn't be vulnerable, and being vulnerable is a significant part of bonding in a relationship. You have to show yourself. So I was the same way. Like, if I was in pain and, you know, something happened and somebody like, are you okay? You know, my reaction was, leave me alone. I'm fine. You know, it was just this, get away from me. Don't, you know, it was impossible for me to just cry and crumble in front of someone and let what I was really feeling, because that is vulnerability. You have to be as you are and trust that the other person will not drop you, or will be there in a way that's compassionate. But I didn't know what that was, because I've never experienced it. You know, I had never experienced it. So when I was fragile and upset and at my worst, I would become angry and push people away and like be mean to them so that they would walk away and leave me. And then I would sob in devastation because I was also abandoned.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm the same. I can't cry in front of people. I just can't do it. It's an extremely rare event. But then, you know, it's interesting. I had a family member who never showed that in front of us. So it's almost like it was sort of trained in that you just don't show that vulnerability in any kind of public setting or in front of people that you're close to and love. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I still,
Well,
if it does happen, I still beat myself up about it, because it shouldn't happen.
But it's part of the programming too, because at home we weren't allowed to be touched. Neither of our parents touched us, and that was a rule, that we weren't to be touched in any way or hugged or shown any affection. We weren't allowed to show any emotion. particularly during the trafficking. You just had to be numb. You know, and the few times where, because I'd get to the point where I couldn't stand it anymore, you know, at home, and I'd turn around, tell my father that, you know, F off, and then either a brick would fly at my face or at the dining room table, or, you know, things like that. So it was never safe to feel. And every time I tried to feel even anger, I was punished mercilessly. You know, we were whipped and beaten and everything like that. So as an adult, for me to feel my pain, I'd have to go down the beach, run right up to the end of the beach, which was like 5 kilometers away. There were no houses, scream my guts out, then run back to where the car was and be normal again and go home. Because, you know, I didn't, you know, I lived out on my farm for 5 years. And during that period, I felt all my pain because I lived by myself in the middle of nowhere. I couldn't even see another house, and it was finally safe for me to feel my pain.
Wow.
Whereas with other people, I would just go numb.
Yeah. Oh, goodness. Yeah, it's, you know, I remember when I got into therapy, and I had the good fortune of finding a person. She wasn't a traditional psychology trained person. She was trained in divinity, but she had heard about ritual abuse. So even when I didn't know what I was describing to her, she did. And so that relationship healed me a lot because it gave me that foundation that I never had. First of all, I had to develop an attachment to her, but a real attachment. Because see, before I was always, and I still am, you know, very independent, you know, I had to figure everything out myself. I had to endure impossible things. So, you know, you become very independent and you don't need anybody else. And needing was not allowed. It seemed like a bad thing. So I just never needed anyone. But then once the memories started to come up and all these, I mean, I would wake up screaming and sweating with a nightmare. It was just a memory that would come through. And I was suddenly shredded because all of these things now, I could not contain them anymore. They were just erupting. So I really did need her. And that made me so scared that I would abuse her. I would like verbally, I would say things to her and I would be angry at her and scream at her because I needed her so much that I had to attack her and push her away because of course I knew that that wasn't going to be possible. No one was going to be there to hold me or help me. So my need would go unmet. And that's what I was trained to know, right? So I assumed and projected that onto her. So bless her heart, she tolerated a lot of me coming at her. And she got savvy. So, and we worked on the phone, which actually was very, very helpful because it would have been too threatening to be in person, right? And so she would tell me at times, she would have to tell me, okay, you're going to have to calm down, like put the phone down. She would tell me, put the phone down and scream, turn on some music and just scream your full head off, get all that rage out, you know, and I would try and argue with her and say, if you don't do that, I'm going to hang up. And then the child in me would get scared, but she had to set that boundary. And so I learned to take that emotion and just express it with the phone down. And then I would go back on the phone and start crying, that the vulnerability would come in, right? And then she would say soothing things to me and whatnot. And so over time, and the other thing she did, which no normal therapist would do, is she recognized the depth of the trauma. And she kind of understood what I needed. So she was available whenever I needed her. So sometimes I would talk to her every day. Right. And so all I had to do was reach out, and then she would give me a time when she would be able to call and I would talk to her. So over time, she was consistently there, like a mother with a baby. Wow. Since I didn't get it back then, it's never too late. I got it with that therapy relationship with her. And today I feel different because of that. It's like I do have a foundation of attachment in me now that I got through that experience with her.
Wow, what an incredible therapist.
Yeah, she really
I
was.
wonder how many other people she was able to do that with, because that would be incredibly difficult.
Yep.
To be on call.
Yeah. I mean, if she ever watches this show, then, you know, I would just say thank you. Thank you for saving me, you know, because I couldn't, you can't function And this is what the cabal knows, right? You cannot function without attachment. And, you know, so we have this extreme, but I just want to say something. This is something that's done to all children. So I was born in 1964. When I was born, my mother was given general anesthesia. So she was not present during my birth. And that's what they used to do back then. And then they had to push me out with forceps, which is violent, right? But then think of it, even when my daughter was born, what they do, at least here in America, they take babies from the mother after birth and they put them in a little bassinet in a room with all the other babies. And then the relatives go and stare through a barrier of glass at their baby. Look at any mammal, when their babies are born, what do? They're immediately latched on nursing. They're piled all on top of each other. There's that body contact. Yeah. That's the safety. That's the attachment for a baby, is that physical connection. And so culturally, they actually deliberately did that. They made it seem normal to take your baby after it's born and put it away from you. I mean, what? And then if you think about it, I don't know how it is in Australia, but in America, you're encouraged to have your baby in a separate room by itself in a crib. Now, when I look at a crib and I see the bars, you know, it looks like a prison cell to me. And they're alone. And I mean, adults like to sleep together in bed, but a baby's supposed to be in a room by itself.
I know, so, it's insane.
It's crazy. Yeah. So it's culturally created, this severing of attachment is a cultural thing that happens right from the get-go to all babies, right?
Oh yeah, I've got some stories to tell, Darlene. My children were both born premature, and my first child was taken and put into a into a nursery of sorts, away on a different floor, which I also found very distressing. Thankfully, I was allowed to have him in with me the next day. But my second child, they kept from me for 6 days. And they tried to kick me out of the hospital. And I wasn't being difficult or anything until they tried to kick me out of the hospital. Because and I was trying to establish breastfeeding. Yeah. And so then I got difficult and I said, you're not kicking me out. And if you try and do that, I'm going to, and I pointed to the couch in the nursery, and I said, I'm going to put myself on there, and I am not going anywhere, and you're going to have a problem on your hands. And then they let me have him. But in that same nursery, there were some really nasty nurses in there too. There were some lovely ones, but there were some really nasty ones. In that same nursery was a little Aboriginal child, and the mother of that child had been shipped off miles away because I don't know what they'd done to her to convince her to ship off, that poor darling. That's just how they ran things, you know, and it took that was really a weird situation, because I reckon I was on the brink of one of those CPS type situations where they wanted to keep my kid, because they just wouldn't let me have him, and then they wouldn't let me take him home. And so thankfully my partner and I, we were married, we pointed out we weren't going anywhere without him, and so they eventually discharged us. It's a very weird doctor in that situation, and that's just really common, particularly in South Australia. If there's anything in the background that they don't like, and obviously, you know, I was a red flag because of my family, they just keep the kid.
Yeah, these it is outrageous, the power that the medical system has over us, as if somehow they own us and they can tell us what to do. And in the last few years, you know, that's become much more pronounced. And I know that during the you know, I don't want to say the word because it'll may get censored on YouTube, but you know, the hoax, right? That starts with C. That thing, I heard about a lot of mothers who would go in the hospital to give birth, and they would get tested. And if they were positive, then they were told they couldn't see their newborn for weeks. They would be in quarantine. And it's like, what? That first contact is the most significant and important moment of that child's life. You know, they know who we are because they can hear our voice in the womb, and they can feel us. And so they already know who we are. And when they come out, it's kind of startling for them. They were in this one environment, now they're in this other one. And so you see it in all indigenous cultures and in animals. The baby's immediately put on your chest. There's immediate skin to skin contact, right? And so to separate a baby from its mother like they did to you, I mean, that breaks attachment. That's so harmful. And of course, you know, recently I was reading last year, the United States at one of the global health conferences was actually took a position against breastfeeding. You know, why? Because breastfeeding is the ultimate bonding experience. You know, first of all, it's the best nutrition for the baby. The milk that the mother produces, it has everything the baby needs. Formula is a very poor imitation. And secondly, it's that physical bonding that happens. So, you know, they want to destroy that. So it's really twisted, but they know what attachment is. And that's why there's so many little ways that it's broken. Even, you might not think of this, but even like the idea of preschool, it's a relatively modern idea, right?
Yes.
It's getting kids away from their parents at younger and younger and younger ages. And then the economic situation, where in more recent decades, both parents have to work often to make ends meet. That's deliberate too. So you put your kid in the United States. Do you know what maternity leave is? 6 weeks at most. And then after that, you're supposed to hand your baby over to some stranger in a daycare and go back to work.
Where they do God knows what with them.
Right. And you're not bonding with them and you're not feeding, you know, it's a breaking of attachment. And yeah, you know, no one's going to take care of your baby the way that you are. You know, hopefully you're lucky, but what if you're not? Yeah.
In third world countries where you'll see women will watch programs and they'll say, well, where's the baby? Because the mother's not wearing the baby, because that's strange in other cultures. Where in our culture, we just shove the baby off in another room. And there's a lot to be said for co-sleeping.
Yeah.
There's so much carrying on about, oh, you're going to roll on the baby and squash it. Well, how often does that happen in third world countries? How often do we hear about that in actual third world countries? Because there's an instinct, unless the mother's drunk or either parents, you know, really out of it, there's an instinct to protect. And that's one of the most beautiful things you can do with your child, is because the baby feels safe, because they wake up and you're there. And so they don't have the night terrors, and they don't, you know, if they're unwell, they cope better with fevers and all the rest of it. There's a lot to be said for it.
And there's that skin to skin contact, which builds the safety in the baby. And then the baby's experience is, oh, I'm cared for, I'm safe, I'm warm, I'm next to my living, breathing maternal or paternal figure. It's, you know, I think of a dog with puppies, right? Yes. They're all piled on and, you know, and they want to be close. It's a natural instinct. That's what we're meant to do. So of course, in our society, you know, that's considered America is very anti co-sleeping too. So
yeah, well, they're very anti it, yeah, as well in Australia, shockingly so.
Yeah. Doug, what was your experience when you had your kids with that kind of thing?
It wasn't too bad. When my son was born, I was there in the delivery room, and I went off with him to help bathe him, and then I think he got put on his mother's chest, but I brought my kids up, you know, very, very cuddly affection, always with them. As a baby, I'd have nightmares. I'd sleep on it. I'd roll on them when they were in the bed, but we put the cot next to the bed, so that way they were close. But there's always lots and lots of contact. And so same with my daughter. It was, you know, yeah, I think we're out of the hospital fairly quickly within a couple of days and home. And yeah, but for me, because of the childhood I had of no touch, I was very, very conscious with my kids. You know, I'd carry them around with me constantly, you know, and do things with them. And, you know, I you know, worked from home since my daughter was born. And so I had very, very strong bonding and was always there with them. And they were like the family in a sense that I never had. So, you know, they were part of my healing, and hopefully I was part of theirs as well.
Yeah, no, I can say that for sure with my daughter. And, you know, when I gave birth, my body didn't want to let her out because I had had 2 babies forcibly aborted almost at term from the trafficking. And so when she was trying to be born, I didn't remember that memory in my mind, but my body remembered it and was scared to let her out because I thought she would be killed. And so I ended up having to have a cesarean. And, you know, when it was all said and done, I was in the hospital room and I had her right on me. And you wouldn't believe, the nurse tried to convince me to put her in the bassinet. She said, why don't you put her in here? And I said, no, I want her in contact with my body. Like, and no matter what she said, I kept saying, no, 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 no. And then at some point, I think I went to the bathroom and they came in and they took her, my husband was there, but he didn't think anything of it. And they took her to the area where they, you know, take a footprint or do those things that they do. And I came back and she wasn't there. And I started screaming. I was screaming at the top of my lungs, where's my baby? And I told my husband, they're killing her. They're killing her. You know, he was like, calm down, calm down. And then they rushed her back to me and that, you know, they labeled me the crazy lady, but I was so protective. I was like, I quit working. I raised my daughter full time because I couldn't do that. You know, I had to feel her, that she was going to be safe, you know, but I really remember in the hospital, the constant push to separate us.
Yeah. But do you think having children has been part of your healing?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Because I got to love her and hold her. And I was she slept. I was scared to have her in the bed, but we had this little thing that had 3 sides. So the 4th side you would put right up to the mattress of the bed. So it's kind of like she had her own little section. And being able to attend to her needs, being able to take care of her, protect her, it was very, very healing for me. And I knew she was safe, and that because my anxiety was huge. You know, it was like I had this terrible fear that something bad would happen to her. That's the thing I sometimes feel like, oh, I hope that didn't negatively impact her because I was so anxious as a mom. But I wore her all the time in a sling and a Bjorn. Friends would marvel at the fact that she would nap on my body. So I did that right. In the first year of her life, I basically wore her or held her all the time. And it was very, very healing. And even to this day, you know, she's a teenager now, she's 19. And it's like she grew up safe. She has not been abused. She has not been raped. She's been loved. She's safe. It's so soothing for me.
Yeah. How about you, Rachel, being a mother?
Greatest achievement of my life.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm so glad, because it's funny, I convinced myself I wasn't going to have children.
Me too.
And then I'm not sure what kicked in, but something did. It was actually after my memories came in, some of the first ones, and I was pregnant within a couple of years. And it's interesting because that then really made the memories come in, because the instinct to protect was so intense. I had to remember enough to keep the people away from them that I knew were truly evil. But yeah, it's the best thing I've ever done. And you, Doug?
Oh yeah, it was a dream. I mean, because I grew up not having a family. Basically, that's how I saw the world. I mean, I connected to source. I had a very strong spirituality as a child, so I connected to my concept of God, and that's what got me through. And I vowed never to get married after seeing what my parents' relationship was like. But then I met a woman who vowed never to get married as well, and we both got married.
Oh, beautiful.
So, but yeah, I was very paternal. And, you know, and this is in, you know, what was it? I'm trying to think, probably the 90s. You know, I'd be pushing my kids along the street in the pram and down the park, and it wasn't cool for dads to do that, and I didn't give a stuff. It was like, no, these are my kids, you know, and I'm going to enjoy every moment with them, because one day they're going to be grown up and off on their own lives. And so for me, yeah, and, you know, like Max, that's why I worked from home, because I just wanted to be there with them. I wanted to protect them. I wanted to enjoy them and have that experience of family that I felt I never had otherwise. And for me, I've got so many happy memories.
Yeah. I think one thing that I noticed when my daughter was little, you know, I watched her play. And she's an only child, so I would always have a little friend or a few friends come over. And I mean, they were so adorable. And my daughter was very bossy, you know, would direct, and they would have these imagination things and do all this kind of stuff. And then sometimes, you know, if she didn't have friends over, she would want to play with us. And so my husband she would say, Papa, you're the cat, you know, so he'd get on all fours and she'd put a leash around his neck and tell him what to do. And he would do it, right? And he would play with her. And I remember watching that in astonishment. I didn't know how to play. I never got to play. So I felt very weird and uncomfortable with the idea of playing. Like I couldn't quite do it. So what I could do is read books with my daughter and, you know, I don't know, sing songs and do physical things, you know, like kick a ball around or something. But that kind of imagination play, my husband thankfully was so good at it. And I felt a little weird, like left out, but I didn't know how to do it. No.
Yeah, well, you probably had, as you said before, you had to be the adult in your childhood. You had to look after your mother rather than, you know, being a child and just having fun.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, you know, one thing I noticed as an adult, you know, since we're talking about relationships and trauma, is I don't expect much or anything from people. And I'm always surprised when they're there for me or they say they like me or something, you know. There's just, I'm, like I said, I'm very, very independent, you know, and so I don't, if I'm having a really hard time, my tendency, like you said earlier, Rachel, is just to figure it out myself or freak out privately. But I never would show anyone anything but a very positive, bubbly, good face, you know. And I learned how to do that because when I was a child, unlike you, Doug, I grew up with money, and, you know, cocktail parties with the president of the country where I was living would come, and I had to learn how to be social in these elite circles with these kinds of people so I could do that. And I can still do that. I'm very nice. Like if I'm at the grocery store, I say hi to, you know, the cashier, and I'm very outgoing, and people think I'm so social, and I am, and I can do that. But when it comes to something deeper, and like particularly if I feel vulnerable or I'm upset or I need something, that's when I go and isolate myself. And I cannot, it's frustrating to myself, but I can't quite let somebody else take care of me because I've never experienced that. And I'm afraid they're going to fail. And it's this, I don't know if this makes sense, but the wish is so great, that unfulfilled wish to be cared for or nurtured or seen, that I can't allow another person to do that for me because they might fail, and then that would hurt more. So it hurts less to not expect it and not have it than to want it and risk not getting it.
And there's always the expectation, isn't there, that they're not going to do it right anyway. And
Yeah.
so you'd be disappointed anyway. And so if you do allow yourself to be vulnerable and you allow someone to help you, then they'll never do it right.
Right. Right.
But it's nice to allow them to. For me, it would be a trust issue, you know. And when I was, you know, my late teens and excelling, you know, at art and school and things like that, I'd have quite a number of people who would, you know, want to support me in that, but I couldn't trust them because, you know, I thought, what do they want? You know, what are they going to take? And it's taking me years to come to terms with that. The first job I was in, they wanted to send me around the world as a thank you for being such a good worker. And I accepted it, but I almost had a mental breakdown in accepting it because I didn't have any coping mechanisms to deal with good things. And I never thought I'd go around the world and all that. So it was a huge lesson for me. And it's taken decades to come to terms with when someone says something nice to me, to say, thanks, I really appreciate it. Oh, that's really lovely. Instead of going, oh, no, you know. And so for me, I've had to make a conscious effort to keep making myself more vulnerable, and also to be receiving help and receiving thanks, and also to ask for help. Often I would never, ever ask for help. And so, you know, part of what I've been doing, particularly in the last decade, is allowing people to help me, allowing people to do things, because I think I need to do that to develop more as a healthy human being.
Yeah. No, I think that's really true. And I'm trying to practice that myself. And when I have practiced it, I've told myself, okay, because the trauma does this thing where, you know, if a person sort of fails us, then, oh, you're done. And so there's no allowance for a person to be human and have, you know, be awkward. Like it's such a need to have that, and such an expectation that you won't, that if they fail even a little, oh, no, forget it. So I had to overcome that. And like, if I would need someone, then I would learn to accept that they might be a little awkward back, you know, but they sincerely want to be there for, like, when I first told my husband some of the things that had happened to me, you know, he didn't know what to do with that information. So he just sat there and didn't say anything. And so I felt very abandoned. I thought, see, because my therapist would say, tell him. So I would tell him, and then I'd go back to her and I say, he just sat there and didn't say anything. He doesn't even care. And she said, no, no, no. She said, he's overwhelmed and he doesn't know what do you say to someone when someone tells you these kinds of things? He was trying his best. So I had to learn slowly, okay, so he does care, but he's not always going to show that in a way that seems perfect. You know, he's just a person too. So it's allowing the other to be awkward or fail sometimes, right? But they mean well.
Yeah.
Jill, you're nodding your head.
Yeah. Oh, so many situations where I've done exactly the same thing, and in past relationships where people have just not known how to deal with it. And there's also, you know, there's part of you that has to realize too, in some circumstances, you need to have that support, and the person you're with, that you're sharing that information with, might not be that right person.
Yeah.
Either as a therapist, which you live in partner should never be, but also as the right partner for you. You know, sometimes you've got to let people go as you become more aware of what's happened to you in your life, because they're just not the right people to help you move forward. And it doesn't mean there's anything wrong with them. It just means that you need someone very, very strong. If you're going to, especially if you're going to be telling your story publicly, you need to have someone very, very strong beside you who's not going to be affected by their friends saying, oh, your girlfriend's crazy, or, you know, who aren't just going to step back and say, this is just too much.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've lost friends when I've told them what my past is like and they can't deal with it. And they've been wonderful friends, but it's more comfortable for them to identify me as crazy than to admit that these sorts of things go on in the world, you know, with particularly ritual abuse and things like that. But the other thing I've learned is to not take life so seriously. And I think when you have a past as traumatic as we do, life was incredibly serious as a child.
Yes.
It was life-threatening repeatedly. You know, the first time I remember laughing was age 12 at school. And I remember it so vividly because I'd never laughed before in my life. And I laughed, you know, I was with the teacher and a few other students, and someone said something that was funny. We all laughed, and I'm like, oh, I've never done that before, you know. And it's, you know, when we go through such trauma, life can become so serious at times that sometimes I'd find I've just got to step back from everything and just laugh and look at the stupidity of things and look at all the silly things I've done in life. And, you know, like I remember riding to school one day on my push bike, and I thought I'd ride through a puddle, not realizing it was 5 foot deep.
Yeah, it's that's playing, right? So we didn't get to play. So it's really, I think it's really important now for us to play, you know. I forget that too, but why not have a little fun? You know, just turn on some music and start dancing at home with your family, just for fun, you know, or go bowling or whatever. Like, do playful things. That's my cutting edge too. I'm working on that a lot. And the other thing I wanted to say about something you said earlier, Doug, is, you know, I don't know if you guys can relate to this, but throughout my my time in my 20s and 30s, when I was in my career, and even now, like, people will say to me, like, wow, Max, you know, like people say now, like, you put on your show is so great, we love it, you know, or my prior bosses would praise me and give me, you know, awards and stuff. And I always felt like a fraud. So I felt like oh, somehow I'm tricking them. It's not really me they think I'm so great, but I'm not. They don't really realize. So I don't know if you guys have ever felt that, but I would feel like a fraud when someone would praise me or see me as good.
Yeah, I'd find it hard to like accept their comments.
Yeah.
But I don't know whether I would, you know, people are going to be, how do you achieve what you do? You're superhuman, da 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 da. And I just wouldn't respond. I wouldn't know how to respond because it probably didn't match the perception that I had of myself. You know, it's like body dysmorphia. You know, I get that a bit as well. And it's, you know, often living in your head and outside your body and all these sorts of things. When people say these things, it sort of like brings you back into the present. And I'm not used to living in the present. So it takes me a little while to adjust, to process it. And sometimes I have to go back to people an hour later or the next day and then respond to what they said, because at the time I'm sort of caught off guard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've had that with people telling me how strong I am. It actually used to make me really angry, because it's like, well, what choice do I have? I have to be strong. I'm not going to go into a mental institution because that's what people would expect for someone, you know, in those circumstances.
Right.
I'm not doing that. I'm what choice? It's a bit like when you ask for patience, you know, don't ever ask for patience, because you'll get endless situations where you have to be patient. So I must have asked to be strong in this lifetime. All right, did that again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I agree, Rachel. But what can you do? What can we do with our past? We can't erase them. And we know shoving them down doesn't work. It only creates more problems. You know, I'm doing a lot of memory retrieval work at the moment, and you know, it's difficult, but I notice how I respond to other people, to stimuli, is shifting massively. You know, recently I started remembering all the trafficking, and that's taking so much trauma out of my system in how I respond to other people. And so, getting back to one of your points, Max, energetically, how people respond to us, all of a sudden I'm noticing people are responding to me in a different way. Rather than just expecting me to do things for nothing, they're saying, oh, I'd like to pay you for this, you know, even community things and stuff like that. And I'm like, okay, well, obviously the energy I'm giving out is shifting as I'm remembering the memories and as I'm processing them and not carrying them with me. And then that's affecting how people are reacting to who I am.
Yeah, I'm working on it, but I still have a hard time when people do things for me. And like I have these beautiful people that you both know who help with Unbroken. And every day I still have a hard time believing, why are they with me? Why do they like me? Why are they helping me do this? And it's hard to, and then I've heard all my life that I do things really well and I do such a great job, but inside I feel like I'm never enough. Like I'm never doing enough. Like I'm not good enough and I should do more. And I'm working on that because I want to feel that thing that's there, you know, which I'm learning to take it in and to feel. And I'm in the last few years, I've learned I really have to consciously choose to do it, but I've begun to call people and say, you know, I feel anxiety, I'm feeling scared, you know, I've called both of you in the last year, right? And
Yeah.
you helped me through some tough spots and it went well. So then that builds experience in us. So if we dare to try it, then slowly but surely, I think we can change that and become more vulnerable and more open to letting other people help. And so I can do it now, but I can do it for a short time. So it's like, okay, so I talked to you okay, I'm done. Thank you. You know, you've helped me. I don't want to take any more of your time.
Oh, I totally know where you're coming from there, Darlene. Absolutely.
I could tell.
Yeah.
well, it's uncomfortable to accept help. You know, I find that, you know, I had someone message me the other night. We're out to dinner with the group. She's got a similar past to me. And I just said, look, I'm starting to get a bit of the chronic fatigue coming back, you know, and I think that's because of all the trauma work I'm doing. And she messaged me and said, do you need any help? And I'm like, you know, it's awkward. And I thought, no, I need to respond. I need to say to her. So I thought of some things where I did need help. And, you know, because I want to be comfortable asking for help, you know, But it's, you know, we've had to be so tough in this life.
Yeah. So, you know, I'm realizing we've been talking for over an hour. So, you know, I think we can wrap this up and just, you know, I want to hear from both of you, but I want to say to people, you know, if I can come back from what I came back from and have good friends as I do now, and relationships and a husband and a daughter, we can all heal whatever relationship stuff you know, that has affected us from our childhood. And, you know, it's normal to find ourselves in a repeat situation. You know, for example, the classic, the battered woman who ends up being with a guy and he ends up being an abuser. And then she gets to the point where she breaks off that relationship. And then when she gets into another one, it's a similar kind of man. Now, that's not bad luck. That's the subconscious of that woman. You know, let's say she had an abusive dad. She expects that. And so I always tell people, when you meet like a partner in a relationship, it's like person A is like, oh, and person B here, hi. But what's saying hi is your little, that bubble that cartoons has. Here's all your subconscious and here's all your subconscious. And the subconsciouses are going, ooh, we match. You're going to do this and I'm going to do that. So that's how we attract people. And that's why it's so important to do your shadow work and your inner work, because the more you know, and no one's perfect. I operate every day with all my anxiety and my parent, you know, all the things in me. It's just that I know myself now, right? So when I'm interacting with someone, I'm going, oh, I'm getting a little nervous. So what do? Let me breathe. And so it's important to know ourselves and our patterns and to do that work, because then when I meet someone now, it's not my subconscious meeting their subconscious. I'm much more aware of who I am and who they are. And so all you have to do is do your own inner work. That will make you have better relationships. So that's what I want to kind of say as my parting little piece. So what about you, Rachel?
Well, yeah, you very succinctly put together pretty much what I would have said. I think people need to be very kind to themselves. If they've had any kind of trauma, relationships is the hardest thing to deal with. I mean, a lot of people who are severely traumatized can still have a good job if they're lucky, or they can, you know, be high achievers. But it's the social interactions that really suffers the most. So be kind to yourself. It's a process. And I'm still not comfortable in my skin in a group situation, but I'm comfortable in my skin in ways that I never was as a child or as a teenager or as an early adult. So if you can recognize some of the things that have happened to you, it's not a negative. It's actually, that's the building blocks to actually get better and to get stronger and to be able to interact with people more appropriately and be present, not be, like you said, working from the subconscious.
Yeah. Doug?
Yeah, I think for people to believe in themselves and to trust themselves, because and to say to themselves that you're worth it. You know, I mean, I've died a million deaths on my journey, and I've been embarrassed probably 10 million times, and I've done stupid things, and I've said inappropriate things, and it's gone on and on and on. But each time I've just picked myself up and I've laughed at myself plenty of times and kept going. And sometimes it's been painful in how I've related to other people. Other times I've hid in a cupboard and, you know, felt like never coming out again and things like that. But it's just pick myself up, keep going, and you get resilience and you realize, you know, we're all in this together. And as you heal, you attract better and better people into your life, and you don't have time for the people who treat you badly. And the journey's worth it, and it's messy. It gets ugly, it gets beautiful, it gets funny, it gets crazy. It's all of those sorts of things, but that's living and that's life, and it's beautiful.
Beautifully said, Doug. I love that. So we'll just leave it here for today then. So thank you both for this conversation, and we'll do it again soon.
I look forward to it. Thank you, Max. Thanks,
right.
Rachel.
Thanks, guys.